So the two most important parts in a gaming PC are your CPU and your graphics card. By and large, they're gonna be the biggest determining factors in your in-game performance, and it's also gonna set the stage for what the rest of your system might look like. For example, if you're starting out a build with a high-end Ryzen 9 3950X and an RTX 2080 Ti, it's likely that you're probably gonna be using a hefty power supply, a case with good thermals, and a high-end CPU cooler as well. So today, instead of rattling off entire parts lists like I often do, we're just gonna focus on the CPU and GPU. What CPU and GPU make sense together given a wide variety of budgets. That includes $600, $800, $1,000, $1,500, and $2,000 limits. We're gonna be covering all of those price points today and what the best CPU and GPU pairings are for each of those. Once you know which CPU and GPU combo is right for you, it makes budgeting and choosing parts for the rest of your system a bit easier. Before we get into that though, there's a couple things that I should note. For starters, all of these pairings that we're talking about today are optimized for gaming workloads specifically. So if we have to sway one way or another with our budget, more of the money is gonna go towards the GPU as opposed to the CPU, because again, we're targeting maximum gaming performance, which is generally more GPU dependent. Similarly, just like we're targeting frame rates, we're also prioritizing performance as opposed to aesthetics. We don't really care what any of this looks like, what the parts will look like if it has RGB. We're not concerned with that, so we're not gonna be spending extra money on those nicer looking parts. We just care about the raw performance here. On top of that, and this is a big one, all of the pairings in this video are gonna feature AMD Ryzen processors and NVIDIA GeForce graphics cards, and there's very good reasons for that. Hold on, let me just stop it right here. Hey guys, I wanted to quickly point out that the reason I don't feature any AMD GPUs in this video, it's because you're an NVIDIA shill! What? No, it's because of the widespread driver issues they've been having, which has made them really hard to recommend when NVIDIA offerings have been pretty stable. Having said that, I shot this whole video a day before learning that AMD had just released a driver update that had apparently fixed a lot of the black screen and crashing issues that were affecting Radeon users. Lucky me. While that's great news, at the time I'm recording this, I still think it's a bit too early to tell if all the driver bugs have been ironed out for good. But I don't want to cheat AMD out of any acknowledgement in the event their cards are now in good working order either. So, rather than spend countless hours reshooting, I've added text annotations throughout the video that provide AMD GPU alternatives where I see appropriate. It's a less than graceful solution, but hopefully you'll forgive me out of the kindness of your hearts. With that, I'll kick it back to host Kyle to tell you why I didn't feature any Intel processors in this video. A decision I still stand by. For starters, there are just stronger CPU offerings from AMD right now than Intel, and this includes things like performance per dollar, having a cheaper and more scalable platform, features like PCIe Gen 4, more overclocking freedom, and a lot of these CPUs in the Ryzen line include a Wraith cooler that's actually pretty decent for a stock cooler. Plus, it saves us quite a bit of money that we're able to allocate elsewhere in the build. On a final note, even though I'm only listing specific model names for our CPUs and GPUs, I am going to be listing suggested prices for every other component that would be required to assemble a full system. So these are just estimates. The pricing that you see is just one man's opinion. These are just sort of rough guidelines. I would say within a $5 or $10 difference. It's just a way to give you a starting off point if you have no idea what you should be spending on any particular part. So with that said, let's go on to our first build, which is a $600 system. And I have paired for that, for a $600 build, an AMD Ryzen 5 1600 AF and an NVIDIA GTX 1660 Super. So right off the bat, the AMD Ryzen 5 1600 AF is probably one that you've heard about. I've talked about it to some degree on the channel, but it is an $85 6-core 12-thread Ryzen processor that's actually built on the 12 nanometer process as opposed to the 14 nanometer process that the original Ryzen 5 1600 was manufactured on. So this is basically a refresh, and it actually is essentially a Ryzen 5 2600 in disguise. I mean, the performance is pretty much on par with the Ryzen 5 2600, which is fantastic when you consider that you're getting that for $85. It's unbeatable, which is why I'm just gonna tell you guys right out of the gate, this processor is on 3 of the 5 lists that we're covering today. And this is the AF model. This is the refresh. I've confirmed it down below. People have posted their CPU images saying, oh yep, it's 12 nanometer right there. This is the refresh. I mean, hundreds of people have already confirmed this. So I've actually purchased 2 of these already. I'll put links in the description in case you're interested. Feel free to use my Amazon affiliate link, but it really doesn't get much better than this, guys. It includes a Wraith Spire cooler. It's 6 cores, 12 threads. You can overclock it. It's $85. It's $5 I don't know what else to say about that. It's just a crazy deal. It's almost too good to be true. Over here for our graphics card, we have, again, the GTX 1660 Super, which is a great value in its own right. At $230, and I'm not saying that you should get this Asus one particularly. I've kind of just chosen these cards based on what the lowest price is without being like a blower style card, because those are kind of garbage. But $230 is about as cheap as you can find one of these 1660 Supers. And the 1660 Super is arm's length away, gaming performance wise, to a 1660 Ti, but it can be had for quite a bit cheaper. So I think it's definitely the better value. That's what I concluded in my review of it. And I think it's a fantastic GPU for 1080p gaming. If you're targeting 1080p, you're gonna be able to run pretty much any game on high to ultra settings. Together, I think this processor and graphics card make a fantastic combo, but if you're trying to target a $600 build with both of these components, you are gonna have to cut some corners. So let's talk about the pricing that I've outlined for the other components in the system. So for our $600 build targeting 1080p gaming, we've got the Ryzen 5 1600AF and 1660 Super, which leaves us less than $300 for the rest of these components. That's not a whole lot, so we really have to be frugal here. And this is not a dream build. We have to temper expectations. We have to be realistic here. But by cutting the right corners in these areas, it allows us to get this great CPU and GPU pairing into this really low budget system. So starting with the motherboard, I'm putting $70 here. That's pretty much the bare bottom basic B450 motherboard that money can buy. It doesn't get much more low end than that. It's not gonna be a fantastic board. It's not gonna look nice. Again, we don't care about aesthetics here. And it's gonna have pretty much zero bells and whistles. Only the basics, only what you need to get up and running. But if you're trying to target the absolute most frame rates possible for $600 and not $1 over, this is what you gotta do. It goes without saying you're not gonna be able to afford the most blazing fast memory kit with this tight of a budget, but for roughly $65, you can probably get a decent dual channel 16GB kit of DDR4 memory at 3,000, maybe even 32,000 or 3,200 speed memory. For storage, I really wanted to include an SSD, even at this lower price point. So we do have a $20 SSD. This is probably gonna be some obscure Chinese brand SSD, or if you can find a really good deal on a name brand drive, this is gonna be 2.5-inch SATA Rev 3, 6 gigabit per second, no fancy M.2 or NVMe stuff here, but it's gonna allow for much faster boot times, much faster load times than having a single mechanical drive, which is just, I don't know how anyone can live with just mechanical storage nowadays. SSDs are cheap enough to the point where there's almost zero excuse to not have one in your system, even if it's only 120 gigs. It's enough to hold your operating system and some frequently used applications like your web browser, so you're not waiting 5 or 10 seconds for Firefox to launch. The $50 is your mechanical storage. You can easily find a 2 terabyte Seagate Barracuda, for example, for that price, and it's kind of an unbeatable value in my opinion. Our power supply is $45. This is enough to get you a decent 500 watt, 80 plus certified unit. It's not gonna be modular, it's not gonna look pretty, the cables are gonna be ketchup and mustard more than likely, but it's gonna be more than enough to drive this system. And if you get one that's been properly tested and has good reviews, it's not going to explode, which is important. The case, $35 for the case. This is, again, sort of like the motherboard, bottom of the barrel. The most basic case imaginable. And our CPU and GPU combo here, while they don't run super hot, like the 1600AF is a 65 watt TDP chip, doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to look for a case that has decent thermals. Maybe one with a full mesh front panel, maybe it includes 1 or 2 120 millimeter fans, things like that are good to look out for. But that's our system. That's our $600 on the dime system. Let's move on to our $800 system. For our CPU, we're keeping the Ryzen 5 1600AF, but we're upgrading our GPU to an RTX 2060 KO. This is from EVGA specifically. EVGA's essentially cut some corners in the manufacturing process to bring the overall cost of the card down, but this still performs pretty on par with an RTX, a standard RTX 2060, and is a really great value. For $310, this is just the regular KO gaming card. They also have the KO Ultra for $10 more, which is not too bad either. But if you were trying to save the most coin, the best value I think is going for the 310, just regular KO version. This card's capable of not only 1080p gaming, but also gets your foot in the door to 1440p, which I think is kind of the sweet spot for gamers right now and here in 2020. If you can go 1440p, that's kind of where you want to be. It just adds that extra level of crispiness and detail to your games, but it doesn't have the crazy demands that 4K does. So it's a lot easier to drive for cards like this. So $310 here, $85 there. We're at roughly $400, and we have roughly $400 left to spend for our other parts. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. You can see the first part I'm dumping more money into is our motherboard. I really want to get out of that basic entry level tier to get something a bit more robust that has more longevity. And for 110 bucks, you can get the B450 Tomahawk from MSI, which is time and time again has just been hailed as like one of the best budget B450 boards out there. It just has phenomenal power delivery for the price, and several reviewers have had no issue even testing it with a Ryzen 7 3700X 8-core 16-thread processor. So it's a fantastic value, and for this price point, $800, I don't really see a need to spend a whole lot more on a motherboard for a Ryzen 5 1600AF. Our RAM has been increased slightly from $65 to $75 here. That way we can actually get some 3600 speed memory, or at least some memory with much better cache latency or better timings than we otherwise could at 65 bucks. That'll increase our frame rate further, and this is still, of course, a 16 gigabyte dual channel kit. Still don't need a cooler here. I don't really see a point in spending money on that right now. For storage, you can see we've upgraded our SSD budget to $40. That'll give us roughly a 250 gig capacity, nearly doubling what it was in the $600 build, which just gives us a lot more freedom and a lot more ceiling room, so we don't get that storage anxiety that we otherwise would. $50 still for the mechanical storage, and power supply and case have both been bumped up to $60 each. We're going to be drawing a little bit more power with the RTX 2060 KO than we were with the 1660 Super. We want to be able to account for that. Maybe this $60 price point, if you're lucky, if you find a good deal, could get you a semi-modular unit or a higher efficiency rating, things like that. And you also have a lot more options with a $60 case in terms of better airflow. Maybe it includes more fans, has a higher quality interior, and things like that. $1,000 PC, $1,000 price point. This is where everyone's gonna get mad at me and dislike the video because we're still using a Ryzen 5 1600AF, an $85 CPU that we're pairing with an RTX 2070 Super, a $500 GPU. This sounds ludicrous. Hear me out here, guys. The goal of these pairings is to optimize them for gaming performance given the budget at hand. So for $1,000, I've already cut as many corners as I feel comfortable with our other components like the motherboard, RAM, power supply, case, and all that. If you guys are saying you need to pair a faster CPU with that GPU, well, we could do that. We could get a Ryzen 3600, which would definitely give us faster gaming performance, but it also costs $175, which means we would have to sacrifice our RTX 2070 Super for a cheaper graphics card, which would end up meaning less frame rate overall than if you were to pair a slightly slower CPU with a faster GPU. And personally, this is the better matchup. The 3600 and the 2070 Super, I would take that any day, hands down, over the 1600AF paired with this GPU. But with a $1,000 budget and not going $1 over and still accounting for the price we have to pay for all the other components, the 1600AF, it's the only way we can squeeze an RTX 2070 Super into this build. But let's take a look at the pricing for everything else. Maybe it'll make more sense when you see it all together. So this is our $1,000 PC that can target pretty much any resolution. 1080p, it's a little overkill for that, but if you're doing high refresh rate, you're trying to get 144 hertz, 240 hertz, then it could make sense. But really, I think the sweet spot for this kind of system is 1440p. And I think this further validates us using the Ryzen 5 1600AF over something like the 3600, because as you scale up in resolution, you become more GPU bound. It takes less pressure and stress off of the CPU, and you really start to see the performance gap between various CPUs start to close up as you become more reliant on the graphics card. So with the processor and GPU taking up nearly $600, we have roughly $400 left to spend on everything else. I'm keeping the motherboard the same, still perfectly good for the 1600AF. Our RAM is the same, cooler, don't need it. Storage, exactly the same. The only thing we've really scaled up here is our power supply and case. The RTX 2070 Super suggests a 600 to 650 watt unit, and because we're not doing crazy overclocking, I mean, we've got a stock Wraith cooler, and we don't have a super high hot running chip, I think a 600 watt unit would be perfectly fine. I mean, you could definitely find like an 80 plus gold certified, maybe even semi-modular unit for this price. And then our case at 70 bucks, there's a lot of really competitive cases at this price point, actually. I feel like the budget case market has really come a long way in the last few years. For 70 bucks, you can get something that has really good airflow, potentially a full mesh front panel, several fans included, and good cable management, maybe a power supply basement, and things like that as well. Stepping up to a $1,500 build, we're in a completely different ballpark ballgame now, and we're finally upgrading our CPU. No longer are we using the Ryzen 5 1600AF, we're now bumping up to a Ryzen 7 3700X. This has 2 more cores and 4 more threads at its disposal, and it's on 7 nanometer, baby. The gaming performance of these chips is significantly better than their 12 nanometer predecessors, and with a $1,500 budget, we can actually afford to throw one of these in the system without compromising in other areas of the build. We're also stepping up our GPU to an RTX 2080 Super. Ridiculously fast $700 graphics card. We're already taking up roughly two-thirds of our budget with these 2 parts alone. This pairing gives you an extremely solid position at 1440p and 4K. Let's see what I've priced out everything else to be. So for 1,500 bucks, I'm still going with the $110 motherboard. Motherboards like the B450 Tomahawk can handle a Ryzen 7 3700X no problem, without struggle. So if you're really trying to make the most of gaming performance here, which is what we're doing, then I see no point in spending more than necessary when you can allocate that saved money towards parts that'll give you higher frame rates. So $110 for the motherboard, still $75 for the RAM, still no cooler. Yes, the 3700X does have more cores and more threads. Yes, it does run hotter than the 1600AF, but it includes a much better stock cooler. The Wraith Prism RGB, again, I just don't see, unless you're trying to just overclock balls to the wall, which is almost less of an argument now with Ryzen 3000 series chips because the PBO algorithm is so aggressive already, you don't get there's not a whole lot of performance left on the table with manual overclocking on these chips. So I think you can still save money here by skipping the cooler altogether. Storage is the same, $40 SSD or the $50 hard drive. Power supply and case have been upgraded once again to the roughly $90 price point. So power supply you're gonna need a big boy unit. I would say 650, maybe 700 watt here. You're drawing a lot more power from both your CPU and your graphics card. You want to make sure that you're getting 80 plus gold efficiency if possible. You're probably going to want semi-modular or even fully modular cables, and that's going to cost you extra. And similarly, you're going to want to make way for this new hardware with a nicer case, maybe one that has a slightly larger interior so you're not super cramped, especially because, I mean, the RTX 2080 Super, you start getting some pretty big coolers on these cards just to account for the extra heat, so you don't want to feel too cramped inside of your case. That can also throw off your thermals and stuff. So get a decent case for just under $100. I think you should be good to go there. There's plenty of options at this price point as well. So that's our $1,500 build. Let's talk about our final pairing, which is the $2,000 system. $2,000 for 2,000 bucks. We're keeping the Ryzen 7 3700X, and we're upgrading our GPU once again, a final time, to the RTX 2080 Ti for $1,100. This is the cheapest RTX 2080 Ti I could find. It's the EVGA Black Edition. $1,100 plus $300, so we've got $1,400 on the table. We've got $600 left to spare. For our other parts, let's see how I kitted it out. We're keeping the same budget for the motherboard and RAM. We haven't changed our CPU since the last build, so there's no reason that I can find to change our motherboard as well. Our cooler, this is all just one man's opinion. This is subject to change, but for our cooler at this point, I would say, okay, maybe you could consider buying something like a mid-range air cooler. I think you can buy that 120 millimeter Noctua, I forget the exact model name, but I think it's like a $65 cooler. You could slap that onto your 3700X. It'll be cooler and quieter. If you did want to play around with some overclocking, if you really wanted to, it would allow you to do that to some degree as well. This isn't necessary though. You could still get away with using the Wraith Prism RGB and put the $65 toward anything else in the system that you see fit. This is just a suggestion, one suggestion of many. Here you can see I've increased our SSD budget for the first time since the beginning of this video to $65, and that's gonna get us roughly a 500 gig entry-level NVMe M.2 SSD. Something like I think the WD SN550 it can be had for around this price at 500 gig capacity. So fantastic. It's gonna double our capacity of the other drives that we had earlier. It's got our foot in the door to NVMe, so we have faster speeds, much faster than SATA 3, and the M.2 form factor just allows for quick and easy installation. It's really nice to have those drives when you can afford them. $50 still for our hard drive, of course, if you wanted to. At this point, I would say if you wanted something that has a better reputation than like a Seagate Barracuda, even though I've had zero problems with them in the last few years, you could maybe allocate your cooler money to a better drive, get like a WD Black or something like that. Up to you. Power supply and case, we're once again going up slightly here, but not a whole lot. Once you reach the RTX 2080 Super, your case and power supply don't need to be a whole lot crazier for an RTX 2080 Ti. So you can still get maybe a 750 watt unit, 80 plus gold for 95 bucks, fully modular. For around 100 bucks, you can definitely find a case that has good airflow, acoustics, build quality, all the important things that matter for a chassis. For $150 plus, you can find ones that have tempered glass glass on 6 different sides, or integrated RGB lighting, or tremendous amounts of radiator support and water cooling support. But if you don't really need all of those extra things, you can definitely find something that fits the bill with flying colors for this price. So that's it. Those are my CPU and GPU pairings that I'm sure none of you will take issue with or berate me in the comments for. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know what you think though. Honestly, you guys know me, I'm always open to hearing criticism as long as it's constructive. So please share your thoughts down below. If you're already using any of these pairings, let us know how that's been working out for you. Apart from that, guys, toss a like on the video before you go and get subscribed for more tech content on the way. Also check out Bitwit.tech, our merchandise store where we have lots of items for you to choose from, plenty of sizes for shirts and hoodies and things like that. Our heatsink glasses are super dishwasher friendly. You can wash them over and over and the printing on them will not fade. It won't wither away or chip or anything like that. It's super high quality stuff. And it's a great way to give back to the channel if you like what we do here. So feel free to check it out, guys, Bitwit.tech. Apart from that, thanks again so much for watching. Have a good one, and I'll see y'all in the next video.